It starts with a story everyone in the neighborhood knew by heart. A quiet suburban mother, gone in what looked like a violent home invasion, a broken window, a ransacked bedroom, a husband and 2 children upstairs who claimed they heard nothing at all. For 7 years, the idea of the mystery intruder lived inside that town like a parasite. Detectives chased leads that dissolved in their hands. Neighbors slept with their windows locked. And the surviving family learned to repeat the same version of events until it stopped feeling like a lie. Or at least, that's what they wanted everyone to think. Because one night, a 22-year-old young man walked into an interrogation room, sat down, and said he needed to speak off the record. What he confessed in the next 90 minutes destroyed the official story, implicated his own father in a cover-up, and dragged a buried family secret into the light. This is a case of the son who finally told the truth, and the family that built their lives on a lie. From the street, the Hughes family seemed painfully ordinary, the kind of family you drove past every day without thinking twice. A 2-story home with a blue-painted porch, a lawn that was always cut too short, a mother who baked for school fundraisers, a father who waved from the driveway even when he didn't want to talk, 2 kids who grew up in the same routines as everyone else on the block. There was nothing unusual about them, nothing suspicious, nothing that hinted at the storm building behind those walls. The mother, Rachel Hughes, was loved in that predictable, suburban way, not the kind of woman who drew attention, but the kind who made people say she was too good for this world after the tragedy. The father, Daniel, was a picture of a quiet, disciplined man, the type who coached Little League even when he worked overtime, a man people respected, or at least didn't question. Their son, Evan, was 15 the night his mother died. Back then, people described him as a shy one, a little awkward, a little withdrawn, nothing alarming. And then there was Lily, the youngest, 12 years old at the time, sweet, soft-spoken, always watching. Every family looks normal when the truth hasn't been uncovered yet. Here's what the official story claimed for 7 full years. Around 2:17 a.m., an intruder entered the Hughes home through a shattered kitchen window. Rachel, downstairs cleaning up after a late-night baking session, supposedly startled the intruder. A struggle broke out. She screamed, but somehow no one upstairs heard it, and she was stabbed multiple times before collapsing near the dining room doorway. Evan, the teenage son, told police he found her after hearing the dog bark. The father called 911. The daughter hid in her room crying. And by the time the police arrived, the intruder had vanished into the night. The living room was torn apart, drawers overturned, cabinets open, a purse emptied on the floor. It was chaotic, almost too chaotic. Most break-ins don't look that theatrical, but investigators tried not to judge too quickly. They've learned that real crime scenes sometimes look staged, and staged crime scenes sometimes look real. The autopsy later revealed that Rachel had died quickly and violently, but the story had holes, massive holes, because something about the entire scene felt like it was trying too hard. And more importantly, none of the neighbors heard anyone break in. No footprints led to the window. Nothing valuable was actually taken. But without a confession, police can only push so far. So the case turned cold. For the next 7 years, the Hughes family kept living the same script. The father went back to work within a month. People found that odd, but grief makes people do strange things. He never remarried, never moved, never changed his routine. The son, Evan, drifted through life like someone carrying a weight he didn't know how to drop. Therapists said it was trauma. Teachers said it was withdrawal. Friends said he was fading. And the daughter, Lily, she never talked about that night. Not once. Not to her friends. Not to her teachers. Not even to her future boyfriend. But sometimes people noticed something unsettling. She watched her brother too closely, as if she knew something he was trying hard to forget. Whatever truth the family buried, they buried it together. At 19, Evan started showing signs of something cracking. Not a breakdown, not yet, but a kind of internal misalignment. Detectives later said his behavior reminded them of a pressure cooker with a valve stuck shut. He avoided any discussion of the case. reacted strongly to any mention of home invasions, flinched when people brought up his mother, and refused to sleep with the bedroom door closed. He also developed a habit of lingering around the police station for updates, even though the case was cold. Officers assumed he was grieving. In reality, he was checking to see if anyone had discovered the truth. When he turned 22, something finally snapped. People thought it was stress, or guilt, or the weight of a secret pushing too hard on the walls he'd built around it. But the truth was simpler. His sister, now 19, had confronted him, quietly, fearfully, and told him something their father never expected to hear. "I can't pretend anymore. You have to tell them." That conversation is what pushed Evan through the police department doors at 1:06 a.m. alone. Pale, silent, he asked to speak to a detective off the record. They put him in an interrogation room, turned on the camera, and that's when he began to talk. Interrogations don't always start with yelling or pressure. Sometimes they start with something almost gentle, like a quiet room, and an officer who doesn't know yet that the next 90 minutes will change everything. Detective Hartman sat across from him, expecting the usual, a witness, a citizen tip, maybe an anxious neighbor who remembered something. But Evan didn't ramble. He didn't pace. He didn't cry. He just waited until the room was silent and said, "I lied about the intruder." That sentence landed like a drop weight. Hartman didn't rush, didn't lean in, didn't accuse him of anything. He simply asked, "Tell me what you mean." And Evan exhaled, the kind of breath you release only after holding something in for so long it becomes physically painful. "There was no intruder," he said. "Not that night. Not ever." What he said next would unravel everything the town believed for 7 years. This is where the real story begins. The detective leans back in his chair and watches the son's breathing fall into a shaky rhythm. It's the first real crack in the young man's composure, and he sees it. He doesn't move, doesn't speak, just lets the silence land like a weight on the table. The son grips the edges of the chair as if he's bracing for impact. "Can I just say something without it going in the official report yet?" he asks. The detective answers the way trained interviewers do, with a subtle tilt of the head that says go on. Not a yes, not a no, just enough room for the truth to slip out. The son swallows. There was never an intruder. There it is, the line that rewrites 7 years of investigation in less than 5 seconds. The detective doesn't flinch. Internally, though, he registers a shift. Everything about the case is suddenly upside down. The son continues, "I didn't mean for it to happen, but it did. And my dad, he made me lie. He said if I told anyone, we'd both lose everything. So I kept it quiet. All of it." He's trembling now, and his voice has a hollow quality. The sound of someone letting go of a secret they've held so long it became part of their nervous system. The detective folds his hands together and finally speaks. "Start from the beginning. Whatever you tell me, just tell it straight." The son nods. "It was late, close to midnight. Mom was waiting up for me. She wasn't angry at first, just tired. But then it turned into one of those conversations where every decision I'd ever made suddenly became a disappointment to her. I'd had a bad night. I snapped back, and then it escalated. Fast." He stops to catch his breath. She grabbed my arm. I pulled away, harder than I meant to. She stumbled. She hit the edge of the counter. It wasn't like in the movies. There wasn't some big dramatic moment. She just dropped. He covers his face. I froze. I didn't call 911. I didn't even check her pulse right away. I was too scared. The detective studies him, mapping the behaviors, hesitation, guilt, fear conditioned over years. "What happened next?" he asks. "My dad came downstairs when he heard me yelling. He saw everything. He didn't even check on her. He looked at me and said, 'You didn't do this. Someone broke in.' And I just went along with it. He told me exactly what to say when the police arrived. He staged the windows. He messed up the living room. He even told my sister not to come downstairs." The son's voice cracks. She was 13, and he made her part of it. That detail sits in the room, like a bruise, slowly forming. The detective doesn't interrupt. He wants the son to keep going. Momentum is everything in a confession like this. My dad kept saying no one would ever question it. And he was right. For years, every detective who worked this case believed him. Even when the evidence didn't quite fit, he always had some explanation ready. He wipes his eyes. I don't want this anymore. I don't want to keep lying. My sister barely talks to anyone now. She shuts down every time someone mentions Mom. I think she's scared of him. I think she always has been. There's a long pause. Then the detective asks the question he's been building toward. Why now? Why come forward after 7 years? The son stares at the one-way mirror as if he's finally seeing himself clearly. Because I'm tired, he whispers. And because she deserved better than the story we told. The detective gives a small nod, then quietly steps out of the room. As the door closes, the son sinks forward, elbows on the table, hands shaking. The soundproofing swallows him whole, leaving only a thin, brittle silence. In the hallway, the detective meets with 2 other officers. That's a full confession. One of them says, "It's more than that," the detective replies. It's a confession, a cover-up, and witness intimidation wrapped into one. They begin discussing next steps, an arrest warrant for the father, forensic review of the stage scene, a psychological evaluation for the son. But the detective isn't entirely satisfied. There's still one missing piece, the sister. Inside the interrogation room, the son sits with his head down, unaware that across the building, his sister has been waiting with a victim advocate. When the detective enters a room where she's sitting, she doesn't even look up. She's been here before. Counseling sessions, interviews, court-mandated meetings. Trauma bleeds into everything. He sits across from her. Your brother told us what happened. He says gently. Her reaction is immediate. She closes her eyes, almost relieved. I knew, she whispers. I've always known. He studies her. Did your father ever tell you what to say? She laughs under her breath. A short, bitter sound. He didn't have to tell me. He'd look at me and I'd understand. That's how it always worked. She's quiet for a moment. I thought maybe my brother would tell someone someday. But he never did. And I didn't want him to be alone in it. The detective nods slowly. You're not responsible for what happened. You were a child. She doesn't respond, because children raised in fear struggle to accept innocence. Back in the interrogation room, the son looks up when the door opens again. He knows the detective has heard everything he needed to hear. He knows what comes next. What happens to my dad? He asks. We'll handle that, the detective says. Right now, you just need to focus on telling the truth consistently. Everything gets better from honesty. The son nods, but his expression is complicated, relief mixed with dread. There's one more thing he says before the detective leaves. For 7 years, everyone thought the danger came from outside. But it didn't. It never did. And that's the moment the entire case shifts from a mystery about an intruder to a psychological study of a family that tried to hold itself together by burying the truth alive. The detective leaves the room with the kind of controlled urgency that comes from knowing the window for action is small. Confessions like this, raw, voluntary, emotionally driven, can shift if the suspect gets time to think, or worse, time to talk to the person they fear most. So the next steps need to be precise. He walks straight to the supervising officer's office. We need a warrant now, he says. The father orchestrated the cover-up, and the son's confession corroborates everything we suspected, but never had enough to pursue. The supervisor doesn't argue. He's seen stage break-ins before, seen the messy imprint of fear and family loyalty in every angle of a falsified crime scene. But this one had always felt strange, too polished in some parts, too chaotic in others. Now it finally makes sense. While the paperwork is prepared, officers move quietly through the station. Decisions are made in low voices, but the atmosphere shifts. Everyone knows the case that's been collecting dust for years is finally cracking open. The father arrives at the precinct 40 minutes later, unaware of what's unfolding. He was told he needed to clarify a few details with detectives, and he showed up with the same calm confidence he displayed 7 years ago. He walks like a man who believes he's already outsmarted the system once, and can do it again. He takes a seat in a different interrogation room, one with colder lighting, and a camera already rolling. The detective walks in, silent for a moment, letting the man settle. There's a subtle power in silence, something the father doesn't expect, so it unnerves him just enough. The detective finally speaks. "Your son is here." The father tilts his head. "Why?" "He wanted to talk about your wife." The first real flicker of fear touches the father's eyes, almost imperceptible. "I told you everything there is to know." "That's interesting," the detective says, "because your son just confessed." The words land like a stone dropped into still water. No immediate reaction, just a ripple spreading across the father's face. The detective doesn't stop. "He told us there was no intruder, that the scene was staged, that you made him lie, and that he's been carrying the guilt alone for 7 years. The father exhales slowly, measured and calculated, as if he's choosing which mask to wear next. But he's too late. The detective already recognizes a shift, the defensive silence, the tightening jaw, the eyes refusing to blink. It's the moment when the control he's held onto for years is slipping. He stands abruptly. "I want a lawyer." The detective nods. "You'll get one." But that doesn't change what comes next. Officers enter the room. The father steps back, almost offended, as if the handcuffs are beneath him, but they still clasp around his wrist with a sharp, final click. As he's let out, the son sees him through the open doorway. Their eyes meet for half a second. There's no shouting, no dramatic confrontation. Just a heavy, exhausted silence between a man who built a lie and a boy who spent 7 years suffocating under it. The sister sits in a quiet room with a crisis counselor. She's staring at her hands, knees pulled up, trying to steady her breathing. When she hears the click of the father's handcuffs echo down the hall, she flinches, not from fear, but from something like release, the kind that feels wrong at first, because trauma teaches you to second-guess even your own freedom. Across the station, the son is moved to a holding room. He asks if he can call his sister. The detective thinks for a moment, then nods. It's allowed, and maybe, after 7 years, they both deserve one moment of honesty that isn't filtered through fear. When she answers the phone, she doesn't say hello. She just says, "I knew you'd tell them someday." He whispers, "I'm sorry." She whispers back, "I know." The community reacts fast. News spreads before the officers even finish booking the father. A case people used to speak about only in lowered voices is suddenly back in the spotlight. Reporters gather on the steps outside. Neighbors who once brought casseroles now talk in tight, uncertain tones. For years, they comforted this family, held candlelight vigils, organized neighborhood watches, and blamed a faceless intruder. Now they're confronted with the truth that the danger they feared didn't come from the outside world. It lived in the house they were praying for. Investigators reopened every piece of evidence from the original case. The stage window, the broken lamp, the oddly inconsistent blood patterns. Things that were explained away by a grieving husband now reveal themselves as deliberate misdirection. It's the kind of forensic reanalysis that turns embarrassment into anger. Detectives asking themselves how they miss what suddenly feels obvious. But that's what manipulation looks like. It hides in plain sight. Meanwhile, the son sits in his cell with his hands clasped together, replaying everything, not the night itself. His memory has wrapped that moment in so much guilt it's become distorted. But the 7 years after, the lies, the silence, the way his father looked at him every time he almost slipped, he finally understands something he was too young to see at 15. He wasn't just covering up an accident. He was covering up his father's control. And now that the truth is finally out, he doesn't feel lighter. Not yet, but he feels real, seen, not buried under a story scripted for him. That's the beginning of healing. Not closure, not forgiveness, just truth. And for the first time since that night, he feels it. The son is still sitting alone when the detective returns, not with more questions, but with something closer to clarity. He sits across from him, and for a moment, neither speaks. The silence isn't heavy this time. It's settling. The detective studies him. The subtle eye movements, the way his shoulders have lowered since the confession, the physiological signs of a person who has spent years bracing for a blow that finally landed and survived it. You know, the detective says quietly, lying is long, it changes your brain, it rewires you. You start living in two realities, the one you know and the one you're forced to uphold. The son nods, slow and unsure. It just became normal. That's what happens, the detective replies. Especially when the lie starts with someone you trust, someone who should protect you. The son doesn't ask who he means. He knows. The detective continues. Kids don't lie unless they're taught to, and they don't maintain a lie like that unless they're controlled. The boy's eyelids flutter, like he's hearing something he was never allowed to think. He always said I owed him, that I ruined everything, that this was the only way to keep the family together. Control, guilt, obligation, the unholy trinity of coerced loyalty. It makes sense now why the son never cracked despite the years of pressure. He wasn't protecting himself. He was protecting the version of the family his father convinced him was the only acceptable one, the one that required silence. The detective leans back. You didn't keep the lie because you were strong. You kept it because he made you believe you had to. It hits the son harder than anything else that day. The truth isn't just that he killed his mother by accident. It's that he spent 7 years still living under the shadow of the man who refused to let that accident be processed, grieved, understood. Instead, he turned it into a weapon. In another room, the sister sits with a counselor who specializes in family trauma. She speaks softly, almost whispering, like she's afraid the room might judge her. I used to hear them arguing. She says, Mom and Dad, before it happened, he always made her feel small. When she died, I thought he finally had what he wanted. Someone to blame who wasn't him. The counselor asks, Why didn't you come forward? She swallows. Because he told me if I said anything, they'd take my brother away forever, and that Mom would be blamed for ruining the family, even in death. The counselor pauses. Emotional manipulation disguised as protection. Classic. Did you believe him? For a long time, she admits. He made me believe everything was my fault, or hers, or my brother's, never his. The counselor nods. When children are raised by a controlling parent, they adopt belief systems that aren't theirs. They learn to anticipate consequences before actions even occur. They become self-surveilling, hyper-vigilant, tools in someone else's emotional machinery. Then she adds, almost too quietly to hear, I used to rehearse what I'd say if someone ever asked me the truth, but no one ever did. Across the precinct, the father sits alone in a holding cell, hands clasped, jaw clenched. He's not crying. He's not panicking. He's calculating, going through every angle that might still save him. Men like him rarely believe the world will hold them accountable. They believe they can out-talk, out-think, or outmaneuver consequences. He's already envisioning the press conferences, the lawyer's spin, the character references. He's building a new narrative, just like he did 7 years ago. He doesn't know yet that his house is being searched, that detectives are photographing inconsistencies he thought he'd buried, that forensic analysts are reviewing every stage pattern with new context, that the story he built with such precision is about to collapse under the weight of evidence he never expected his son to supply. Meanwhile, the son continues talking, not because he's being interrogated, but because he finally can. I didn't mean to hurt her, he says. She was crying. Dad had yelled at her earlier. I thought he was asleep. I went downstairs to check on her. She told me she was leaving all of us. He chokes on the memory. She said she couldn't live like that anymore, that she was scared of him. I told her I'd help her leave, that I didn't want her to be alone. The detective watches the guilt tightening the boy's face, the way his voice shifts into a rigid, monotone cadence. Trauma scrambles memory. Trauma plus guilt distorts it. He speaks like he's watching himself from outside his own body. She tried to calm me down. I grabbed her arm, just to stop her from walking away. I didn't mean to pull so hard. She slipped. He doesn't finish the sentence. He doesn't need to. Accidental deaths during emotional escalations are more common than people think. What isn't common is what happened next. He whispers. He came downstairs a minute later, and he didn't check if she was breathing. He just looked at me, and said, "You just destroyed this family." He covers his face with both hands, as if he's hearing those words all over again. The detective doesn't interrupt. He said if anyone ever found out, I'd go to prison. That my sister would wind up in foster care. That everyone would know I killed her. He said no one would believe she slipped, and that the only way to protect us was to make it look like someone broke in. The detective quietly says, "And you believe him?" The boy nods. "I was 15. He was my dad." Hours pass behind the scenes as the warrant is executed. Officers move to the family house with the meticulousness of people searching not just for evidence, but for the ghost of a lie. They peel back layers of a story crafted to misdirect. They find inconsistencies quietly noted years ago. Dust on the windowsill that should have been disrupted glass from the broken pane scattered in the wrong direction. Drawers pulled out but untouched fingerprints. A forced entry that was too clean. Things that made sense only in hindsight. As all of it comes together, the detective returns to the sun for one final moment before the next phase begins. The phase where lawyers, judges, prosecutors, and therapists start carving their own paths through the story. "You did the right thing," the detective says gently. The sun looks up, eyes red. "It doesn't feel like it." "It will," the detective says. "Eventually, telling the truth always feels like breathing again, even when it hurts at first." He nods, but the grief sits heavy in his chest. Because telling the truth doesn't undo what happened. It doesn't bring his mother back. It doesn't erase the lie he lived inside. All it does is open the door to a life where he can stop pretending. But for someone who's been pretending for 7 years, that's not nothing. It's everything. The sun is just beginning to rise when the son is escorted from the holding room to the transport area. He expected the fluorescent light to feel harsh, but morning light is different. Softer. Too soft for a day like this. It washes over his face in a way that almost feels wrong, like the world outside didn't notice his life, just cracked open. He looks around, absorbing everything with a distant kind of awareness. People moving with purpose. Phones ringing. Officers starting their shifts. Life continuing at a normal pace. Completely unaware that inside him, nothing is normal anymore. The detective stands nearby, watching him with an expression that isn't pity, but something closer to understanding. The kind reserved for people who didn't choose the worst moment of their lives, but still carry it like they did. "You'll get a public defender soon," the detective says quietly. "They're going to ask you the same questions I did. They'll want details. Don't hold back." The boy nods. He's exhausted in a way that feels bone deep, like he hasn't slept in 7 years and his body is finally catching up. He takes one step toward the transport van, but the detective stops him with a hand on his arm. "Listen," he says. "You told the truth because you couldn't live with a lie anymore. That matters. You'll see that someday." The boy doesn't answer, not because he disagrees, but because he doesn't trust himself to speak. Across town, the father sits in a separate holding cell, staring at the wall like it betrayed him. His lawyer hasn't arrived yet, and the silence is unfamiliar. He spent years cultivating control of his family, of their story, of the narrative the community believed. But here, in this stark room, control has no audience. No one is listening. No one is believing his version of the truth anymore. He replays the moment he saw his son in the hallway. The look in his eyes. Not fear. Not guilt. Relief. That's what unsettles him the most. The sister is taken to a quiet interview room where a detective gently walks her through the next steps. Protective services. Victim advocates. Counseling resources. She listens carefully, nodding in small, quick motions like she's afraid to miss a detail. But beneath that focus is something else. Something fragile and newly forming. Freedom. For years she tiptoed through her own house like it was a stage set for someone else's performance. Every word measured, every emotion muted, every suspicion swallowed. Now, for the first time, she can speak without rehearsing. "They always said we were lucky," she whispers. "People used to say our family looked perfect." The detective doesn't contradict her. He knows too well that perfect families often hide the deepest cracks. Abuse is quiet. Manipulation is efficient. Control is invisible to anyone who isn't living inside it. At the courthouse, the father is formally charged, tampering with evidence, obstruction of justice, child endangerment, and in connection with a homicide, a potential accessory charge. He stands before the judge, chin lifted, expression stiff, still trying to project authority. But the power he held doesn't follow him here. The courtroom is indifferent. The law doesn't bend for a man who once bent his family around his will. Meanwhile, the son's attorney is reviewing the case with him, voice calm, steady, and clear. She explains what will happen next. Psychological evaluations, impact reports, possible plea considerations. There's no promise of freedom, but she doesn't treat him like a monster. She treats him like a human being who made a devastating mistake and lived inside someone else's narrative for too long. As she talks, he stares at his hands. They shake slightly, not from fear of prison, but from the unraveling of 7 years of internalized shame. He starts to realize the magnitude of what he freed himself from. Not just the lie, but the man who built it. Days turn to weeks as the legal process unfolds. Forensic analysts finalize their reports, confirming that the crime scene was staged. Old doubts that once lingered in the margins of case notes now crystallize into hard evidence. Every manipulated detail becomes another thread in the father's unraveling story. The community reacts like communities always do when secrets spill out a house they thought they knew. Whispered conversations at grocery store aisles. Social media theories. People claiming they always sensed something was off, even though they said nothing back then. It's human nature. Comfort is easier than confrontation. Inside the county jail, the son meets with a therapist who specializes in trauma-induced guilt. She listens as he speaks through halting breaths, explaining how silence became a second skin, how he convinced himself that confessing would destroy the last pieces of his family. She tells him something he has never heard before. You kept the lie because you were scared, not because you're incapable of telling the truth. That distinction matters. He hears it. He doesn't fully believe it yet, but he hears it. And hearing something true, after years of deception, matters more than he realizes. The sentencing hearing for the father draws a crowded courtroom. His lawyer paints him as a grieving husband, a concerned parent, a man who panicked. But the evidence tells a colder story, one of dominance, manipulation, and self-preservation at any cost. The judge listens patiently. Then she delivers a statement that slices through the air with a rare, quiet precision. You did not protect your children. You trapped them in a lie. The gavel hits once. Sharp, final. As the father is escorted out, he glances toward the gallery, expecting someone, anyone, to meet his eyes and validate the story he built. But no one does. Not even his daughter, who sits with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, refusing to look up. The son, in a separate courtroom days later, stands before the judge with trembling hands. His voice cracks as he speaks, but he speaks anyway. He describes the accident, the panic, the years of emotional bondage under his father's control. The counselor's assessment supports him. Severe coercion, traumatic loyalty formation, prolonged guilt conditioning. The judge considers everything, including the confession that cracked open the case when no one else could. She sentences him to a term that reflects the gravity of the act, but acknowledges the years he lived under psychological domination. It's not freedom, but it's not the life sentence he spent 7 years fearing, either. As he's led away, he glances back at his sister. This time, she does look up, not with grief, not with judgment, but with something that looks like the first step toward forgiveness, not of him, but of herself. Outside the courthouse, the wind carries the sound of reporters' voices blending together. Headlines spin the case into sensational sound bites. But behind the noise is a quieter truth, one not told in press conferences or courtroom transcripts. This story isn't really about a staged crime scene. It's about control disguised as love, loyalty shaped by fear, families held together by silence instead of trust, and a boy who spent 7 years believing he was responsible for everything that went wrong, only to discover he was the only one who ever did the right thing. When all the lights shut off and the cameras stop rolling, the truth remains exactly where it started, not in the evidence, not in the confession, but in the quiet, fragile moment when the son finally said, "I can't lie anymore." And for the first time since that night, the story that destroyed their family is no longer his burden alone. It belongs to the world now, and he, finally, is free from it.